In the second part of this mini lecture about creativity, let's try to have a look at who can be creative. What are the circumstances, what are the personal conditions of being creative? Let's start with an extreme example. Would you like me to be creative about your eye surgery? Cut it. I'm pretty sure that all of you think, no way. But if you really had needed an eye surgery, a very, very difficult case, would you want the best eye surgeon in the world to be creative about your eye surgery? Almost all of you would say yes. So what this means? It means that creativity is not something independent from the knowledge in the discipline. Only the person who is knowledgeable in the discipline can be creative. That's why I could not be creative in eye surgery. Could I be creative in teaching? Probably yes, because I know quite a bit about teaching, experienced doing that for decades and so on. Now, don't let yourself being misled by examples where some outsiders, people who had absolutely no idea, came up with something remarkably creative. There is a very well-known examples about how they clean walnuts on industrial scale. So it was a tedious work. You take the hammer, open it up, remove all the hard stuff to get out the core and so on. When you want a couple of tons of walnuts cleaned, that's not the way to do it. So they put together a team to think about cleaning the walnuts. And there were all sorts of engineers and food specialists and so on. And there were a couple of guys who had absolutely no idea about walnuts. They were pretty bored with this whole process of trying to figure out what to do with walnuts. And finally, one of them said, why don't you just blow them up? And you know what? This is still how they clean walnuts on industrial scale. Of course, this idiot meant that you put in a tiny dynamite into the walnut, light it, and it will blow it up. Of course, it is complete nonsense. Of course, this guy was not creative. He was just saying something stupid. But this thing that he said triggered the creative idea of the knowledgeable people who were there, of those engineers and food specialists, and they figured out that the walnut is closed pretty tight. And there is quite a bit of air in the walnut. So if you reduce the air pressure outside very, very quickly, the walnut cannot let out the air that quickly. And what happens? It blows up. And then you just blow a wind through that blown up mess of the walnut and the cover, and you get the cleaned walnut on industrial scale. Very important thing, it was the knowledgeable people who were able to create this idea, although the trigger was coming from someone who was not interested or knowledgeable about the process. It is also important that in the schooling we do not encourage creativity. Sometimes we say we do, but actually we don't. Why? We try to achieve all those controllable, measurable results on which we can mark you. Why? Because it has to be controllable, it has to be objective in a way. Now, there are some interesting examples about creativity. For example, Robert Pirsig writes about an Indian tribe, American Indian tribe, who were settling down in an area. And every couple of years, even if that was the best area with most buffaloes and water and everything they needed, every couple of years they picked up everything and they moved to a new location. And when they asked them why you are doing that, you were in like the Garden of Eden for you, everything was there, the forest, the animals, everything, you did not have to work hard. And they said, we need to keep used to change. Otherwise, we will lose our capability of adapting, our capability to create new things. Obviously, this was not their vocabulary, but that was the meaning. You can also see in the old tribes that there are two roles which are perfectly separate. One is the chief of the tribe, who is usually the strongest guy, the best hunter, the best fighter, and so on. And you have a completely different setup, which is the board of elders, the oldest, wisest people from the village. Now, they are judging what needs to be done and so on. So they are advising the chief of the tribe. And the chief of the tribe is the strong guy who can go through with the new idea. What is important about this is that this is bringing you the balance of the static and dynamic. So the fighter chief of the tribe is always trying to bring the new dynamic quality, while the board of elders is concerned about the well-being of the tribe, the well-being of the village, and try to push things to the static way. If you find the right balance between the static and dynamic, it is the same, as we will see later, as between the creative and the non-creative parts of the work. What kind of environment is needed for the creative people to perform really well? The first thing is that mistakes must be allowed. If your every creative idea that you have has to be a success, it is out of question that you will be creative, because no one can do that. You have some ideas, some better, some worse, and some of them might be successful. Some of them might be accepted. Some of them might actually be converted into something more than a creative idea. The other thing is that as we are obsessed so badly, as you have heard in the Knowledge Economy, Knowledge Society lecture in the first semester, as we are so obsessed with being scientific, with the analytical evidence and so on, intuition is usually not allowed. If I just look at our academic publications, you cannot say that I intuitively arrived to my result. You need to justify everything with facts and theories and deduction and so on, so in perfectly analytical ways. In hard sciences, where actual proof is often available, it can be allowed that you intuitively arrived to something because you were able to prove it afterwards. Now, this thinking can be applied to organizations as well. And actually, quite a bit of companies do that. Mintzberg was asked on one occasion about whether he knows of any companies who are performing very well and they substantially depend on intuition. He said that I don't know of any successful companies who do not do it this way. There is also a very famous example about how we conduct market research. There was a company, it took them always very long. They were performing very thorough market research when they wanted to launch a new product. What happened is that they were always late to the market. So finally the CEO decided, he said, okay, from tomorrow, we are not doing market research at all. We have these marketing guys here who know the market inside out. Instead of sending out the surveys and do the sampling and processing all those surveys, we will just ask them whether the new product will be successful in the market or not. And they don't need to justify why they think that. They will, of course, discuss it and so on. But if they intuitively say that this is a superb product, we will go ahead with it. Of course, the time to market was reduced immensely. They were fast and usually the first to get the new product, but that's not the main point. The main point is that the actual market projections were more accurate than from the surveys. So intuition can work very, very well when it is the intuition of knowledgeable people. It does matter very much what kind of people have those intuitions. There is a concept related very closely to creativity, and that's innovation. And very frequently we even confuse the two. They are not the same. They are related, but they are very, very far from being the same. Intuition, creativity, as you have heard from the previous part, creativity results in a new idea, which is original and potentially useful. But this is not enough for innovation. For innovation, you need to take this creative idea, put it at work so that it becomes a value. So converting the new idea into a new value, that's innovation. And obviously, the results of the innovation in terms of business organizations will very frequently be measurable in terms of money. But there are not only business organizations, there are many other kinds of organizations. So not all innovation is obviously measurable in terms of money. Sometimes it is better lifestyle or better health or whatever else. Now, the difficult question really is, how do we evaluate the quality of the new idea? How do we evaluate the quality of the innovation? For the creative idea, there is only one way. It is, you have the specialists who are knowledgeable in that field. If you came up with a creative idea, show it to them. And if they say that it makes sense, that's how it can be accepted. Following Polanyi, this is called the interpersonal verification. The innovation is slightly different. You usually have two layers of getting this kind of evaluation. The first layer we call gatekeepers. These are those guys who are kind of link between the creatives and the audience who will be the users of the innovation if it and when it happens. And ultimately, the evaluation of the innovation will be judged by the users. The problem with that is that it is too late if you find out that the users don't like it. So that's why you want to get something a bit earlier. If you want to understand the gatekeepers better, just think about these Michelin star restaurants and then those who are writing the Michelin guide. They are the typical gatekeepers. Finally, how much innovation an organization needs? Now, it is very tricky because the creativity as a requirement appears probably most frequently in job descriptions. I have even seen job advertisements where they were looking for a junior administrative position. Basically, they were looking for someone to make coffee, and the requirement was to be creative. What for? So it became a buzzword, and we emphasize it much more in requirements than what we really want. Why? Because there are much more jobs that do not require creativity. If you are obsessed with the creative things, who will do the usual things? Who will make your organization work? Who will do the day-to-day jobs? So 99% is this non-creative work that is needed. Of course, that tiny part that is about creativity, it can be incredibly important. It can make all the difference in the world for that organization, but it does not mean that it is sufficient. So if you look at these innovation-oriented companies, very frequently there is a huge mistake when they say that SMEs, small companies, can be flexible, they can be innovative. Completely wrong. Of course, it is true that there are many small companies who started up from a creative idea and they made their fortune, or more frequently they failed. But it does not mean that they can continue being innovative or creative all the time. Why? Because that costs a lot of money. Being creative, being innovative is incredibly expensive. You need to be able to throw large amounts of money through the window. You don't think about R&D, research and development, as something that you are financing and then you are calculating the return on investment. You think about creativity as something that you are sponsoring, and occasionally there will be something that might change the life of the company, that may make you successful, that may earn enormous amounts of money and so on. But it is not happening all the time. There is some calculation which says that it is about 4% of the good creative ideas that can become a successful innovation. It is basically twice applying the 20-80 rule. So 20% of all ideas can be acceptable, 20% of the innovations can be really successful. So it is like the 20% of the 20% is 4%. It is also important to understand that innovation is not always a product. Innovation can be anything. It can be a business process. For example, if you read Bill Gates' At the Speed of Light, he says that Microsoft can be beaten in the software market, but not by product innovation. It can be beaten by business innovation. And we have seen some of this already happening. Now, does it mean that bigger creativity is bigger innovation, smaller creativity is smaller innovation? Not at all. The two pictures that you see on the slide, one is a black hole, which is the great thing. The other is a new dish by Ferran Adrià, who is acknowledged as the best chef in the world. Both of these require great creativity. And one will change only the life of a couple of people who taste the brilliant dish of Ferran Adrià. The other can change the world of science, our understanding of the world, and ultimately the life of all the humanity. So there is no such relationship. Now, to think about creativity and the creative people in preparation for your group session, look up on the internet the Belbin rules of creativity, the Belbin rules of working in teams, and that's what you are going to work with. Thank you very much.